screen share is visible?
Yes, Rahul, it is.
Okay, perfect. So we can go live, Ankita, on Facebook as well
Yep,
now.
you're live now.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another discussion on Election Adda. My name is Rahul Verma. I work here at the Center for Policy Research. Today, we are going to talk about one of the most discussed election this season, which is West Bengal. And to have this discussion, we have an esteemed set of panelists. Professor Mukulika Banerjee, who's an anthropologist at London School of Economics and also inaugural chair of the South Asia Center at LSE. She has written many books, and if you are interested in election and politics, you must read her book, Why India Votes, and also a forthcoming book on cultivating democracy. Uh, Welcome, Mukulika ji. She's also going to moderate the panel today. We have Professor Dwaipayan Bhattacharya. Those of you who study West Bengal should read his book, especially to understand the rule of the left front for 30 continuous years. His book, Government as Practice, coins a new term, which is party society, that in West Bengal, both party and society was sort of like intermingled. We also have Snigdhendu Bhattacharya, who recently wrote a book, Mission Bengal, The Saffron Experiment. So it traces the rise of BJP in West Bengal. And finally, we also have Shoaib Daniyal, who's a journalist at The Scroll, covering Northeast and Bengal very prominently. You should be following her if you want to know what is happening in Assam and West Bengal and also elsewhere in the country. What we are going to do today in next 1.5 to 2 hours, I will start with a very brief presentation on West Bengal. So many of you who know the state very well, please excuse me. These are very basic numbers just to give a context and sense to what is happening in the state. For many of you, these numbers might be of somewhat interest. Then Professor Banerjee will start a moderated discussion with Snigdhendu, Dwaipayan, and Shoaib. And finally, for last 30 minutes, we'll have Q&A. So you can keep putting your questions on the Q&A box. Professor Banerjee, whenever she thinks that there is a relevant question, she can pick up those questions and ask to the panelists. Great. So let's begin the story of West Bengal. Many of you must have seen this map. This is a map released by Election Commission of India when they announced the election. The idea is just to show how West Bengal is going to poll in 8 cycles. When the elections were announced, many people were discussing why 8 phases. So 6, 7, 8 phases are not new to Bengal. 2019 election happened in 7 phases. 2016 election happened in 6 phases. So Bengal for last 10 to 15 years has been polling in 6 to 7 phases. What I think is new this time, where certain geographic regions have been broken down into different phases. So just to give you a sense of West Bengal geography, these are the hill districts, Cooch Behar, Jalpaiguri, and Darjeeling. You have a large number of scheduled tribe population in this area. BJP did very well in 2019 election in this area. Then you come to what is known as North Bengal. These are North and South Dinajpur districts. Then you come to Malda, Murshidabad. This has a very, very high Muslim population. These districts which border Jharkhand, you have Purulia, Bankura, and Jhargram. These districts also have high scheduled tribe population, and BJP again did well in 2019 in these areas. Then you could call this as sort of Central Bengal or South Central Bengal, which is districts of Birbhum and Nadia. Finally, you have South Bengal, which has Kolkata, Havra, Hooghly, 24 Parganas. This is North 24, South 24. And last time, basically, South Bengal became a sort of like, savior for TMC at the end. So if you look at the last decade of election, what has happened is basically the decline of left and the rise of BJP. TMC continued with 40% vote share from 2011, marginal increase in 2016 and 2019. But the big drop is happening in the left front's vote share, and the big rise is happening in BJP's vote share. BJP, which has around 16% in 2014, came down to 11% in 2016, but jumped to 40% in 2019. And this was also reflected in the seat share of various parties. So BJP, which has just three seats in 2016 or 2 seats in 2014, managed to get close to half of the seats in 2019 elections. So West Bengal has 294 assembly segments. Anyone to form government needs 148, and it has 42 parliamentary segments. This was what happened in 2019. So this map is basically the phase map of 2019 election. Phase 1 started with Cooch Behar and Alipur Das, and then basically moved to Darjeeling, Jalpaiguri, then moved to Malda and Jangipur, Murshidabad, then moved to Birbhum and Krishnanagar. Then you had these sort of like what is known as Jungle Mahal districts. Then you had places, Hooghly and surrounding area, Shirampur, and finally in the South Bengal. If you look at the map, which is on this side, this map has been basically broken down into assembly segments. And what we are showing you, which party led those assembly segments. And there was a clear sort of like divide. If you cut sort of like Bengal into two halves, BJP was basically doing better in this half, which is Asansol and Purulia and Jhargram, and in North Bengal. They also did well near places in Ranaghat and Banagaon, but most of the South Bengal, which polled in fifth and seventh phase, basically resurrected BJP. So the wave which resurrected TMC, the wave which started with the first phase, BJP seemed to be sort of like, it could have sort of like they got 18 seats, but they could have gone further. You may remember that between fifth and sixth phases, there was several controversy also related to the statue of Vivekanand. And after that, there was a coming back. And these areas are also strongholds of TMC. So what like 2021 election, if BJP has to do well, they have to breach South Bengal. Without that, the change is not going to happen in West Bengal in this election. And this is just a reflection of basically converting them into vote shares and assembly segments. You could see BJP did really well in first, second segment, sort of like struggle, but still was in the game in third, fourth, fifth, sixth segment. It was South Bengal where they got least number of assembly segments and also least number of vote share if you compare these two. Now, what is happening in Bengal? You must have heard this term, religious polarization. But in Bengal, so this is the data from Lokniti CSDS studies conducted in 2014 and 2019. What I think is happening in Bengal is not a typical religious polarization, which has upper caste or dominant caste Hindu angst at its center. BJP, of course, gained among upper caste and OBCs, but the biggest chunk of gain for the party came from SCs and STs. Whereas, TMC saw a decline in these two segments. So religious polarization in Bengal is sort of like, at its heart has lower caste Hindus, what many people have described as subaltern Hindutva. And what we did in these two graphs is we calculated the proportion of Muslims in each assembly segment and SC and ST in each assembly segment. What you see that in 2019, if like we also did some other analysis, in 2019, TMC basically gained in assembly constituencies which had higher Muslim population, and BJP didn't do well, which is not surprising. But what happens down here is that BJP makes a significant gains in assembly segment, which has higher SC and ST population. So to sum up, what I'm basically trying to say is that West Bengal represents a new wave of religious polarization in the country. It's not the typical divide which is led by the dominant caste Hindus elsewhere. Rather, it has lower caste Hindus at its heart and its center. So BJP's mobilization strategy is best in West Bengal caters to these two communities significantly. Uh, for long, social scientists have been writing that social identities or caste doesn't matter in West Bengal. What we might be witnessing is spilling of social identities into the political realm for the first time. Why this might be happening, the explanation which is coming as subaltern Hindutva. But mind you, this concept or the relationship between why this might be happening has different explanation in causes and also in consequences. So some people are arguing that lower caste Hindus feel that Mamata Banerjee and her government was appeasing Muslims, giving things to them, and they were feeling they were getting short shrift. So economic sort of aspirations or anxieties were at the core why people are now using the language of Hindutva to justify what their shift to BJP. The other possibility could be that slowly with the rise of BJP in 24, there is more ideological convergence among these communities of BJP's agenda, which means now the cause and effect are coming from very different angles. The consequences, therefore, are going to be different, because if it is only dependent on welfare schemes and not getting that, then the nature of shift is very, very temporary and contingent. But if there is a ideological convergence happening, which means the consequences are going to be far reaching, the realignment is far reaching, and it will leave a scar on the nature of social fracture in Bengal politics, and it will take a longer time to heal. To end, this is going to be one of the most contentious elections this time. People are, of course, you have seen in Bengal, political change has often sort of on side always had political violence going hand in hand. But we are here to talk, discuss, learn, and understand. If this was not a pandemic season, we would have invited you all to CPR, have Sandesh, and talk about Bengal politics. So these are Sandeshes in different colors. Just enjoy them and talk, keep continuing discussing politics. Thank you. Over to you, Mukulika ji.
Thank you very much, Rahul. Thank you for that very comprehensive, useful background that we all need before we can start this discussion. And I'm delighted, really, that we have three speakers here who have been writing, publishing over a number of years. Dwaipayan, of course, has been writing for many, many years, a veteran of writing about West Bengal politics. And of late, Snigdhendu and Shoaib have been doing really nuanced pieces, and we'll be drawing on their expertise in particular areas to get this discussion going, because there is so much to talk about. We are going to split the discussion in two halves, and each speaker will come in with their comments. This is the most high stake election that has been in a very long time. We can see that campaigning, what we can, most of us are able to consume the political campaign through various kinds of media. There is the visible media, the photographs, the rallies, the fake rallies, the walling, as it's called, as the word on the street is, when cartoons are drawn on public spaces, which the Election Commission tries to control, but not always successfully. And this morning, Partha Mukhopadhyay, who's from CPR, who is in Kolkata, just sent one in saying he'd seen one, which he sent me. Prithivite keu karud noy, aaj je bondhu she kal shubhendu. So this kind of thing is back. West Bengal campaigns have always been very witty, and there's a lot of wordplay, as we can see. So we'll hope to capture some of that. But as Shoaib pointed out in a recent piece, of course, that there is a large invisible campaign that's also going on through the social media. This is the famed WhatsApp groups and so on. And this messaging of who should feel aggrieved about what is the result of these messages that are circulated. I'm stuck in London because of the pandemic, but in 2019, when I was in Bengal, where I've been watching elections since 1998, I found everywhere that people were showing me messages they had received on their phones with particular, you remember in 2019, some of you will remember Hanuman Puja became a big thing. It was Hanuman Jayanti in April. And around celebrating Hanuman Puja, there was a huge mobilization of really primarily young men on motorcycles with Jai Shri Ram flags on fluttering from their motorcycles. And there was a certain demographic that was driving that Hanuman-led campaign, so to speak, of, I would say, a younger demographic who were quite fed up of polarizations in their families between parents who were divided between left frontiers and Trinamoolias, that kind of polarization had already happened. They wanted their own politics, and they had got behind the BJP campaign. We need to update these messages, and it's fantastic that we have Snigdhendu, who's in Kolkata. Shoaib, where are you at the moment?
I am in Calcutta.
Okay, great. And not Dwaipayan, though. You're in Delhi?
I'm in Delhi, yes. Stuck in Delhi. What to do?
Stuck in Delhi. I know it's for those of us who want to be on the ground, it's a punishment to be so far away. So you're going to be our eyes and ears, Snigdhendu and Shoaib. So for our viewers, what we are going to do is we are going to start the first half. We're just going to look at, or building on what you've seen from Rahul's graphs and fantastic graphics, is I'm going to ask Dwaipayan and then Snigdhendu and then Shoaib to talk about the Left Front-led coalition, the BJP and Trinamool in that order, to talk about what the state of the party itself is, the party organization. West Bengal has had a long story of very well organized cadres of the Left Front, but how well organized are Trinamool and BJP in terms of their cadres, of people on the ground, of money, muscle that have come sadly to dominate Indian elections, and why, and what the word on the ground again is on why they need to win. So the first round, just 5 minutes each, they're going to talk about 5 or 10 minutes each. They're going to talk about this. And in the second round, we are going to focus much more on campaign strategy and issues. We're going to talk about incumbency and record on corruption, the stories that are floating around of Mamata's government. We are going to talk about, of course, the religious polarization, but very importantly, caste polarization, which we haven't paid much attention to over the years in West Bengal. Though I have to say, I should draw everyone's attention to this book, The Politics of Caste in West Bengal, that came out a couple of years earlier, edited by Uday Chandra Hyrstad and Bo Nilsson, which has a fantastic collection of essays looking at caste in West Bengal. And as we've already heard, this may be finally brought to the forefront thanks to the entry of the BJP in West Bengal politics. So I'm going to call upon Dwaipayan first to just tell us the state of the Left Front, its alliance, not only with the Congress, but with smaller parties, the AIMIM, and other smaller parties, what's happening there in that camp. Over to you, Dwaipayan.
Thank you very much, Mukulika. Am I audible clearly? Okay, yes. So great. Thanks, Rahul. Thanks, Mukulika. Thanks, Snigdhendu and Shoaib. It's great to be in a panel with all of you whose writings I've been following for quite some time. And as I told you that I'm now stuck in Delhi with my classes and everything. So there's little chance that I could make field trips to Bengal, which I would have loved to. And especially election season is the time when you get maximum input from all stakeholders as well as people in general. But I will keep this, I will pitch this discussion as we were told it's an Adda. So I'd rather keep it at that level as an Adda. And I can see, I mean, from secondary literature that I've been following, there had been, I mean, sort of changes in the left front, overall approach to this election and the politics therein, especially their last-minute alliance with Indian Secular Front of Abbas Siddiqui, the cleric from Furfura Sharif, who had a certain kind of tiff going on with his another Pirzada, Toa Siddiqui, who was off and on with the left and Trinamool and so on and so forth. But Abbas at the moment seems steadfast with the left and so on. So this actually reorients left's politics in certain senses. Now, if we take a rather long-term view of what's happening to the left and its organizational politics, especially that of the CPM, because CPM had been the backbone of left politics in Bengal for a very long time. Now, you could see that, the fall of CPM from a kind of ubiquitous, all-powerful political party to a complete, a party which was in complete disarray, I mean, sort of dissipation, what I call implosion of the party. I mean, that has happened rather rapidly in a manner of 4 to 5 years to begin with, and then over 10 years. I mean, nobody could have imagined that the party or the left would be, fighting for its survival in this election. So this is a matter of relevance for the party anymore in Bengal at this point in time, given that BJP has emerged as the second force and knocking on the door of power, and who knows, may emerge as the most important or the ruling power in the coming election, after the coming election. So these possibilities are there, and BJP is not very far from that. And if that happens, then the left will have to assume more irrelevance, because then, of course, the oppositional force would be Trinamool, and it will again be a kind of state-level fight between Trinamool and BJP, and left will not be anywhere near. Since I'm supposed to talk about the left, let me see what are the options, both organizational and political, for the party at this point in time, given that the party has gone this downward slope. Now, you see, there was a time when the left organization was strongest at the ground level. In Bangla, you call it Elaka Dakul, I mean, in the sense that you have a complete control over the locality. Now, initially, I mean, this was a function of some degree of acceptance, in the sense that you've got a range of reforms going, a range of restructuring going for equity, for some kind of social justice in your policy, and therefore you had a degree of acceptance as a moral force in Bengal. But eventually what happened was that this presence became increasingly bureaucratic, and what was initially a kind of organic base of the party eventually turned into a kind of a machinery. So in common parlance, what you call dominance without hegemony, in the sense that it was more kind of enforced mediation in every affair of the society without any degree of, or with little degree of acceptance. Now, from outside, it doesn't look as though it was happening, but if you went inside and did your field work, talk to people, you could you could feel the resentment about the overwhelming presence of the party. So, eventually, when the moral compass of West Bengal politics shifted, and it shifted around 2007-2011 period, because as you know that the left stood for policies which were essentially neoliberal in its substance. As a result, that the kind of constituency that the left built for over decades, especially the rural constituencies, that constituency was shocked, and that underwent a kind of shift, which was tectonic, so to say, in nature. And when that shift happened, and the moral compass got completely haywire, now it was time for an opposition party to strike at that point in time, which Mamata Banerjee, given her political acumen and her ability to organize, at that point in time, she could master a certain kind of following in the civil society, in the vast stretches of the political political landscape of Bengal, and the change came. And as soon as the change came, what was the machinery, what was the bureaucratic kind of setup that appeared as a very strong edifice for a political organization, that immediately, almost instantly shifted to Mamata Banerjee. Now, this shift, and West Bengal, you mentioned that it's a very violent politics. I mean, I don't know, in any other language, you have got an expression like hate shuk. Hate shuk, the pleasure of hands, means petano, basically. So, but violence is the language of politics, and this happened for various reasons, including, that it's a matter of survival. Politics is not a passion or not a kind of something that you choose to do in Bengal. It is something that it's a matter of your life and death, given that Bengal is the only state which had two major partitions, and famine and all kinds of migration, the crisis, it's a border state, etc. This is it's a volatile state, and no wonder that this was the state from where you had calls for revolutionary takeover of the Indian state to begin with. So, so it's not a matter of choice. Violence is the lingo of politics. And as a result, what happened that every political party tries to have certain degree of control over the muscle power. Now, the moment the machinery shifted from CPM to TMC, and that the CPM was in power for 34 years didn't help it in any way to strengthen its own muscles and tissues. So the party became completely, it sort of collapsed in certain senses. And, Trinamool came with the slogan that Badla nahe Badal chai, but in Bengal, it doesn't happen that way. Badla happens. And, CPM was also violent vis-a-vis Trinamool when it was in power. It sort of didn't allow the opposition to thrive, although it had certain kind of institutional makeup to give a formalistic presence to opposition, I should say, like Gram Sabha and other places. But it was more confident because it was in power for more than 3 decades. But Trinamool didn't have that kind of option. It wanted to decimate the opposition. It just wanted to get zero of the opposition, to turn it into, nullify it. And there was no support for the left cadre on the ground from the top. And there could not have been any protection at the ground level. So the election of 2018, the Panchayat election, was a turning point, I think, where the Trinamool won more than 30%, 32% seats unopposed, and the kind of slogan that you had after that, the Ebar Ram Pore Bam, there was a clear shift of left vote from the left to BJP to oppose TMC. So this 26% shift, which happened in 2019, was the principal reason for the rise of BJP in Bengal. And now what happens to that vote, we don't know. We will talk about that when we talk about strategies and campaigns. But this is the, overall format in which the Bengal left finds itself now. And so this alliance with the Indian Secular Front is a desperate last-minute attempt on the part of CPM to get into the social, because it was losing the subaltern votes. Yeah, and if you look into BJP's rise, as has been pointed out by Rahul, in tribal areas, in northern areas where you have a large chunk of scheduled caste, Rajbangshis, in southern Bengal where you have a large chunk of Muthuas, the subaltern Hindu votes shifted from the left to TMC, from left to majorly to BJP. So this is a last-ditch desperate attempt on the part of the left to get back to the social. Let's see what happens.
Thank you very much, Dwaipayan. So I'm going to turn to Snigdhendu next to pick up perfectly from there. There are already questions coming in, and one of them inevitably raises the very important question about comparative weight of money and outreach of the three parties, the three-party fronts, so to speak. So if you could just comment on that when you're talking about the party structure as well, the amount of money that they have, particularly in the BJP's case, which is such an issue. Dwaipayan's already indicated, this answers to this very interesting puzzle that anyone watching West Bengal or catching up with West Bengal politics now is puzzled by, is how you can have a shift from voting for the left front to voting for the BJP. You would think that that is, poles apart in terms of politics, of polarization. And here, the opposition to Trinamool and what that means, and that becomes the game in itself, rather than an ideological politics, which is interesting. So is this about ideology at all, or is it about oppositional politics? And it raises the other more general point, which is so important, which we can lose sight of in our discussions of elections and democracy in India, is why it is important to have a strong opposition. If you're going to decimate the opposition, if you're going to win at the cost of not just winning, but wanting to decimate the opposition when you're in power, what that does to democratic politics, where opposition is likely to then come up, what are the spaces it looks for? That's a wider question that West Bengal is a perfect place to examine. But now over to you, Snigdhendu. 10 minutes.
Thank you. And so I will just start from where Professor Bhattacharya ended. That Age Ram Pore Bam theory. It suddenly emerged in around 2018 and got popular among left supporters. It is very difficult to trace where it originated from. But it became popular, and it became popular after the 2018 Panchayat elections, which was crucial in two aspects. One, the unprecedented violence that everybody could see in TV channels, like Birbhum, in Birbhum district, the entire Jila Parishad was won uncontested. And so that created certain anger against TMC. And the second factor was the emergence of BJP as the principal rival. TMC had virtually swept the elections, but next to them were standing BJP. The left and Congress had lagged behind. Even in such a violent election, BJP managed to put up resistance in many places of North Bengal and southwestern Bengal, and won panchayat seats, and even came close to winning Jila Parishad. So first there was anger, and second there was BJP, a new force rising. From this time around, left supporters who had really been hit hard by the high-handedness of TMC and the leadership's failure to give them so-called protection, whereas the BJP kept sending senior level leaders right from 2014. They kept sending senior level leaders whenever there was an incident of violence, even in a small rural pocket. So that kind of gave people a kind of confidence that here is a force that we can try to bank on for our protection when we come under attack from the teams. So if we look at the initial shifting of votes towards BJP or initial gatherings under the banner of BJP, that happened after the 2014 Lok Sabha elections, there were even Muslim villages where people were taking up BJP's flag virtually overnight. Just because if now they get beaten up by the TMC's goons, some state level or national level leaders were going to come and create pressure on the administration. So this is how the anti-TMC polarization happened around BJP. And this is where I can clearly remember while traveling to, that was in Nadia district, when Modi came for a campaign in 2019. That was Tahirpur. So Tahirpur was only the second municipality in West Bengal that was still held by the left. And the local assembly, Ranaghat Dakshin, that too was under the left. The Left Congress Alliance won in 2016. So it was the only other town apart from Siliguri in North Bengal where the left still had some relevance. And then I chose, when I was meeting people who had come to the BJP's rally, Modi's rally in Tahirpur, and I was asking them that how hopeful are you? Why is Modi holding a rally in a CPM hold? What will you gain? Here, the anti-TMC vote will go to CPM. And these workers and these attendees were saying, who are the CPM? We are the CPM. If we don't defeat the TMC this time, they will forcefully take away the municipality. So they were saying that we will again vote for CPM if TMC is hit hard in these elections. When they step back, we will be able to manage to retain the municipality, and we will vote for our own parties in 2011. Now, so many things have happened since that I am not sure those people will really go back to vote for CPM or will give another chance to BJP. And this is going to be one of the determining factors in these elections, because the BJP's so-called rise is so heavily and clearly dependent on the shift of left votes that even a slight swing back could complicate matters, could complicate electoral equations. And there is a possibility, there is this apprehension is also there among a section of Bengal BJP leaders, that this mass induction of TMC leaders could dilute the anger that was prevailing among the left supporters who decided to choose BJP to teach TMC a lesson. So these two factors, in my perspective, are going to have a very determining role in deciding the share of votes. TMC has, since, as Rahul mentioned also, since 2011, maintained its vote share about 40%. So the BJP grew not at the cost of TMC's votes, but at the cost of the left's votes. So this left's attempt to revive itself by tying up with Abbas Siddiqui, hoping to eat into Mamata Banerjee's Muslim vote bank, and this is at the same time kind of also helping BJP to intensify their Hindu polarization agenda, saying that look, the TMC and the CPM are on the same line when it comes to appeasing the Muslims and supporting fundamentalists. We are the only party that can protect the Hindus. So this is a counter campaign going on since the left's brigade rally. And in the following Modi's brigade rally, Modi took sharp digs at the left, though without referring to Abbas Siddiqui or whatever. So since even in his last meeting in Chinsura, Hooghly district last month, Modi had taken digs at the left. So they are giving time to left because this 22% that the BJP gained from the left in 2019 is the most crucial chunk. It won't be right to say that the 27%, whatever 27%, whatever 23% deep, the 22% deep that in left vote share was there from 29 to 7, that 22% entirely went to BJP. It won't be right to say, because there were in Muslim pockets where left votes went to BJP, TMC. So it was clear from the booth level vote analysis that in Hindu areas, the left votes went to BJP. In Muslim dominated areas, left votes went to TMC. Left vote, no vote, virtually no vote in across South Bengal's Muslim dominated areas. So this is another matter which is going to have a complex, I think, a complex impact on the elections in different areas. And the BJP's it is particularly for this reason that there are so many complex equations that the Hindu polarization is intensifying, because this they think is a unifying point that can help us in leaving the other issues behind, or in motivating people to leave the other issues, the other difference behind, and prioritize the question of saving Hindus in West Bengal.
Do you want to stop there for the moment, Snigdhendu? You want to say, yeah, wrap up.
And there was a question, could you, that was about money, resources. I mean, monetary and other resources of parties and it is. So their BJP is unmatched. The left has very little resources. The TMC has certain resources, but the BJP has, I mean, they have the national leadership and leadership from all other states. So many seasoned organizers, leaders, state level ministers, union ministers are coming here. They're camping here, they're staying here, and there are volunteers of various think tanks and RSS backed organizations who have come here from other states. They have started arriving from January and some even from December. They will return only after the elections are over. And some will stay and go back and come back for the campaign. So from the matter of human resources, BJP has an unmatched advantage over every other party.
Thank you, Snigdhendu. I think you've told us something very, very interesting to understand these big ticket defections that we've all been reading about. You know, the number of Trinamool leaders. Obviously, Mukul Roy's presence is very important, but that the fact that people are joining the BJP, who were erstwhile Trinamool leaders, can in fact, you're saying, harm the BJP's support because it initially attracted the voters because they were seen to be and the polarization against Trinamool. These were erstwhile left front voters. And so the big question is, and I'll come back to Dwaipayan later, but to think with, is whether the legacy of 34 years of the left front in West Bengal has left any legacy of the language of rights, of dignity, of the rural proletariat wanting to talk about issues that are not religious polarization, that are not caste polarization, to the sort of achievement, the good bits of the left front regime, whether that has a legacy that may cause what we just heard from Snigdhendu, even this slight swing, which could have a huge impact on the BJP's support. There are lots of really interesting questions coming in, and I will try and club them together and ask them in the second round. But Shoaib, over to you. And I think one thing that you could perhaps incorporate is this issue that everybody talks about of populisms and Modi's populism versus Mamata's populism. And is there anything to Trinamool beyond Mamata's populism? But really, over to you. Your 10 minutes now. Thanks.
Thank you, Mukulika. I'll just get to the populism point in a bit. So when Mukulika sent us an email, she asked us to sort of try and explain why the TMC would want to win. And the answer to that, at least for the TMC, is very simple. The TMC needs to win bacha jonne to basically survive. And why that is so, I'll just explain. I'll just spend a couple of minutes on the organization of the TMC or lack thereof. So the TMC, as we are all aware of, is a very personality-based party. It's a sort of break from Bengal's recent history under the left, which was very, very organizationally grounded. The TMC is a personality-based party. There is the central pole of Banerjee, and which is surrounded by a sort of extremely highly federated honeycomb of local leaders and strongmen. That's the way the Trinamool is structured, because there is really no ground up cadre base or party base the way the left has, or even the way the BJP has in many other states. Although West Bengal really isn't a very good example of the strong BJP organization, but it does have it in many other states. Because of this lack of organization, the Trinamool depends to an extreme amount on the state machinery and the police. So right from Navanno, which is Ms. Banerjee's secretariat, she depends on strong bureaucrats to run the state. She doesn't depend on ministers to run the state, which is almost a reflection of Mr. Modi in New Delhi in some ways. Although unfortunately, Mamata Banerjee does not even have an Amit Shah, so she's even more hobbled and has to depend on bureaucrats. As you go down the hierarchy, local leaders again have to depend on the police machinery. As Snigdhendu very perceptively pointed out, when the election was rigged, the Panchayat election was rigged in 2018. The main role, the main grunt work was actually done by the West Bengal police. So one way to look at this is actually Calcutta controlling and taking power away from these highly developed forms of Panchayat Path that had developed under the left front. Even it had developed to some extent under the Trinamool, and this was extremely resented. As Snigdhendu pointed out, it really can't be emphasized enough as to how the Trinamool shot itself in the foot by trying to rig successfully rigging the 2018 election. And as the fates would have it, one of the people who played a significant role in rigging that was actually Shubhendu Adhikari, who is now in the BJP. So I mean, it's sort of life comes full circle. So that is the nature of the Trinamool. It's a chaotic, very federated, almost anarchical party centered around the personality of Didi. The second point is that the Trinamool, as against Snigdhendu pointed out, the BJP has a lot of resources. The Trinamool doesn't have a lot of resources. The Trinamool actually depends upon small scale local collection, which is actually becoming a bit of an Achilles heel for the party, what is called Tola Baji, what is called the local level corruption. So how this would work for, say, somebody outside West Bengal is if say you're building a new house, or say you're not even building a new house, you're building a new floor. You got a 2-story house, you want to convert it into a 3-story house. As soon as you start construction, as soon as there's a small pile of bricks outside the house, there'll be a knock on the door, and people will ask you how much money you're spending. So if you're spending, say, a couple of lakhs, you got to shell out 10,000 to the local dada. That's how it generally works on the ground. So there's this small scale local collection, which on its own is actually quite significant, especially if you're taking on the left, which actually, as Dwaipayan pointed out, was really a hollow shell towards its end. As he wonderfully put it, there was the dominance with that hegemony. So it was good enough to take on the left. But when you're faced against the Bharatiya Janata Party with these deep corporate pockets, it's really a tough battle. So these two factors, which did quite well for the Trinamool for a decade. The Trinamool has been in power for 2 terms, which is pretty commendable. I mean, I don't know how many people would have said that this would have Mamata Banerjee would have led a stable 10-year government in 2010. So these sort of have played out well, but faced against the specificity of the BJP is really, it's facing problems. 2 problems. One is because of local corruption, which did guarantee a source of revenue for the Trinamool. This is now reaching a point where people are really angry and irritated. If you listen to whenever Mr. Modi comes down to West Bengal, he focuses on local corruption. I mean, that's the number one thing that he focuses on. I mean, it's even communalism, or any nativist Hindu nationalist pitch actually takes a backseat when Mr. Modi speaks, which is maybe an indication that the BJP's think tanks in West Bengal look at this as a huge issue. In fact, it's such a big issue that while the TMC is often accused of being a party that appeases Muslims, there is actually a significant amount of Muslim anger against the Trinamool. We'll find out whether that anger is converted into votes in a bit, which is what Mr. Abbas Siddiqui, which is this angst and the anger that Mr. Abbas Siddiqui represents, because there is also anger amongst rural Bengali Muslims who are also a bit irritated at this corruption. The other thing with the federated nature of the party is, since it is a party that is not sort of strung together by any ideological core, at the very moment that it sees that there is a chance that the party might lose power, large factions could break away. Large factions could be coerced into breaking away, like maybe the BJP has done by using central agencies. This sort of reached its peak, as some of our attendees might be aware that a couple of days back, it sort of reached a tragicomic peak where Sholora Murmu, a TMC candidate who had got a nomination from Hobipur, after getting the nomination, she upped and left for the BJP. So, but people who are more knowledgeable about Indian politics could maybe inform us whether this has ever happened in Indian politics before. We've had Ayaram, Gayarams, but there's an Ayaram after getting nomination before getting elected. So this is really quite unique, I feel.
Okay.
The question that Mukulika had raised with respect to populism. Now, because the TMC really is not with respect to populism. Now let's look at what the left did for its last 10 years. The left, as Dwaipayan pointed out, he's obviously written a great deal about the left end. The left towards the end really wasn't a very popular party, but using its cadre strength, using its organizational machinery, it managed to actually keep its train going for longer than many other parties. So I mean, in a sort of slightly macabre way, it's commendable as to what it is just from a purely organizational point of view. The Trinamool, remember, doesn't have that. So it really depends a lot on populism. I'll talk about it more in the second thing, but the Trinamool basically around a couple of weeks or maybe a month back ran a massive program called Duare Sarkar, which means government at your doorstep or administration at your doorstep, where it just signed people up for the Shastro Sati scheme, for all manners of schemes. And the TMC actually, depends on where you stand ideologically, personally. But if you judge them just on the basis of left-wing populism, the TMC actually hasn't performed badly on that yardstick. The thing is that the problem for the TMC is that there is a level of polarization on the ground, which itself might be driven to some extent by material factors, by as Rahul pointed out in his very perceptive presentation in the beginning, that there is a subaltern aspect. There is not only an aspect, there's a huge subaltern significance to the BJP's rise. So from what I've seen from my reporting is that people do acknowledge that there has been a significant uptick in administrative resources that the Trinamool government has distributed with respect to what the left had. Now, two problems happen there. One is obviously, the problem of the fact that once you get used to something, that you obviously need more and more. So the Trinamool really struggles to do that with respect to a small state budget. The second problem is really the fact that very often this perception exists that while we might have got more, Muslims are getting even more. So there is this local level competition on the ground, which is often expressed in terms of communal vocabulary. So this is why the Trinamool has done, in my opinion, its left-wing populism well, and this is why it won so handsomely in 2016. It is because of these two factors that it's really facing some resistance or significant amounts of resistance in 2021. Now, whether it will be enough to take it over the line. Remember, Duare Sarkar got more than 1 crore respondents, so that's more than 10% of the state population. It's a huge program. Now, whether that will be enough to convince, say, especially Hindu voters that this is a government worth getting back, we'll have to see on second day.
Thank you very much, Shoaib. That's terrific. In fact, just yesterday, wasn't it, that the Election Commission asked for the transfer of the senior police commissioner out of the state, and what you've told us about how critical the state machinery is to, and the police machinery is to Trinamool, that will be significant. And an anonymous attendee has just said that several government servants had already said in 2016 that if Mamata doesn't pass on DA, which I assume is dearness allowance, then she'll be made to lose in 2021. So if the bureaucratic machinery turns against as well. Now, as you know, what I said in the second half, what we'll do, we've already now have a pretty good sense of where the three formations are in terms of where they are organizationally, what's happening with defections, where they built their vote shares, where they lost their vote share. And as a result, a lot of interesting issues have come up, which I'm sure that our three speakers will address. In particular, just looking at the Q&A, if I can just draw your attention to some issues that have come up. One is, and Dwaipayan, perhaps you could take this when in your remarks, is talking about that, is there any legacy of left-wing ideology and ideas about rights? Will, say, the issue of the migrant workers, of which West Bengal is such an important sender state, we are coming up to the 1-year anniversary of the sudden lockdown, which threw them out on the street, literally. Is that going to be an issue? Is the farmers' bills and the mobilization around that a traditional, rural proletariat issue in West Bengal, which is gaining momentum now in West Bengal? It has moved from the north, Rajasthan, to Karnataka, and now in the next, from the 12th onwards, there are several Mahapanchayats being organized. Could this rekindle some of those issues of workers' rights? There's a second set of issues which a couple of people have asked about, which I would like perhaps, Shoaib, if you could address the issue of women's voters. I mean, this is the only female chief minister in India at the moment. And of course, the significance of the Republic Day tableau of the woman, of the girl child reading and working in a computer, the Konyashri scheme, etc. There is always, in every election, we saw this, we've seen this steadily now. I think Rahul published a piece yesterday that there is a specific appeal made to women voters by different political parties. Is that going to have any teeth? Is it going to, are women thinking about governance issues differently to men? And Snigdhendu, maybe you could, Rajdeep Roy has asked both of you for your comments on this. What do you make of the selection of candidates, and whether you think, what are your views on the candidates that have been selected both by the BJP and Trinamool in particular? If you want to say anything about that, this is your chance. Also to say something about, since both of you are in Kolkata, in Bengal, what the campaign actually feels like. It's going to be, it is terrible where at the start of an election campaign, the one thing that is guaranteed is how much violence there's going to be. The grammar of politics in West Bengal is violence. You talked about Hate Shuk. I find it impossible. The other word is Shantrash. That this was a word that was associated with the left frontiers. That kind of terror that violence brings into the West Bengal landscape, especially during elections, but also beyond, if you could tell us something about it. So should we start with you, Dwaipayan? Keep it to under 10 minutes this time, so we have longer for the Q&A, if you can. Thanks.
Right. I mean, this is a very important question, with the kind of legacy that the left rule might have on Bengal and how it will work out in this election and beyond. I think that, the CSDS survey, which was done after the 2019 election, it found rather surprisingly that those who voted for BJP didn't approve of BJP's ideology. And, a large section of them, 70%, said that they don't support BJP on the mandir, on the temple issue. And this I find rather interesting because, it either means that BJP doesn't have an ideological acceptance in large segment of West Bengal's electorate, or BJP will take time to insert its ideological message in the electorate, and that time has not yet gone. It's, after all, it's a process. And since West Bengal had these partitions, and of course migration and migration of the undercastes, Hindus from East Pakistan, and thereafter from Bangladesh and so on. So, it's not difficult to stoke a sense of communal passion in Hindu majority, etc. But it's surprising, that's why I say it's surprising that those who voted for BJP did not necessarily follow this kind of trend. Now, it also corroborates with what all of us are suggesting, that the shift to BJP was from the left, and this was more a kind of instrumental shift rather than an ideological shift. At that point in time, it was more for security than for anything else. And this is something which is significant. I think that this election will either reinforce that claim, or because we will see a certain kind of reversal, or this election will prove that the level of instrumentality that we are emphasizing on, probably it's overstretched, and there is a certain kind of ideological osmosis which is happening at the ground level. So let's see how it works out. Now, as far as other legacies are concerned, especially as regards rights and dignity, etc., Left Front was a response to a chaos. And it was response to a chaos of the Naxalite years and thereafter the Siddhartha Shankar Rai emergency kind of situation, where it was a resistance to certain kind of unruly state action, and it brought in a kind of systematic arrangement of politics at the ground level. So Left Front initially changed what you call the grammar of politics in Bengal to a significant extent by responding to a chaotic situation. And I also mentioned about social peace in the first bout. And so one particular expression that you would have found in West Bengal when you had done your field work, it's called mutual koriya. Mutual. That is, we will resolve a crisis through a certain kind of mutual cooperation. Maybe that cooperation is a bit enforced, but after all, it's a level of cooperation. Mutual koriya. Mutual is not a word you hear anymore. It's gone. Because it is now, and that's why 2018 Panchayat election was a turning point in Bengal, present history of Bengal, because, that election meant that there is no mutual presence in Bengal politics. It's either or. It's either I stay or you stay. There is no in between. So the gray area in between, where certain negotiation could have been struck, that gray area got erased in 2018. And 2019 was a response to that kind of erasure. Now, there are certain changes which are happening in left politics. I don't know whether these changes are long-term or these are impulsive, short-term, contingent in nature. But if you look at the last brigade, which took place a couple of weeks back, this was organized by the young leaders and young workers of the left parties. Now, these students and youth who are now joining the left, they're of course not joining for the governmental munificence. They are not coming to get something out of the administration or to get jobs or something like that. They're coming out of certain other attraction. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure that there is some other attraction which is working there. Now, this is one thing that the left can offer as a tentative promise, that given the kind of either-or politics we are having now, of complete polarization, we are going to recreate a condition of social peace and mutuality, of mutual interest. This is what Bengal may actually look forward to at this particular point in time, when the situation is so conflictual and so polarized. About the other thing, I think another important question which was raised about the resources, and BJP, of course, has the money power and also the state power, enormous. For instance, the investigative agencies and other things, the BJP has enormous control over them. And TMC, of course, the local administration and certain kind of flow of revenue through extortion, petty extortion, I would say, at the ground level and so on. CPM and other left parties of late, they responded to the two crises of lockdown and Amphan in a rather innovative way, which was missing for a very long time. For instance, initiatives like Shromojibi Canteen, this wasn't there before. It could have been there, but it wasn't. They launched this Shromojibi Canteens in different places of the state, first in Calcutta, in certain areas, and then got spread. Like I got a message from Jhargram the other day, where they are running Shromojibi Canteen and so on. And during Amphan, during lockdown, I mean, some of these young workers, I mean, they went to the field, took certain initiative to distribute, certain kind of help to the people. Now, this was not happening for a very long time when the older generation of the left parties, they got an entrenched power position within the organization. They were simply not, used to losing the state power in being active. They without the state power, they were simply inactive without the governmental power. Now, for the younger generation in their 20s, early 30s, and so on, they were not trained in being active with this administration behind them. So this is a new kind of initiative which you are witnessing at the ground level right now. I don't know, as I said, what will be its long-term effect, whether this is a short-term or a rather contingent response to a situation. A lot will depend on what happens in the next election. Because if BJP comes in a big way, then of course the left will be in disarray. And it goes without saying that left is the primary ideological enemy of the BJP, not Trinamool. Because without Mamata Banerjee, Trinamool doesn't exist. But the left can exist even without. And this is the third point, that left doesn't have a face, unlike Trinamool. And so doesn't BJP. But the difference is, as you all pointed out, that the BJP, by inducting Trinamool, BJP has almost become Trinamool's extension. All these people who are now migrating to BJP, many of them had corruption cases against them, allegation against them. So, I mean, how can BJP now claim to be a party of distinction, a party with a difference? Of course, two USPs of BJP was that first, it was an untested party in Bengal. So people would have said that let's give them a chance, let's see what they do. And second, that it was a party which had a clean image, because it didn't have a chance of corruption, it wasn't corrupt in Bengal. So now that you have some of the most, some of TMC veterans who were at the core of TMC regime and who had allegations against them migrating to BJP, BJP gained a lot in terms of spreading organization as a result of that. But it also lost the moral attraction which it had earlier. So how that stands on balance is something that this election will tell us. And finally, West Bengal election, of course, I mean, we have this staggering West Bengal election partly because everyone knows that the election is fought at the booth level. BJP doesn't have presence at the booth level. TMC is the only party which can actually have control over all the booths in the state. Even the left doesn't have at this point in time. So, a lot will depend on how these workers at the booth level transfer votes to their own parties, whether people are, keeping their silence and which direction they vote. This all will depend on the booth level organization that ultimately play a role in the election. Finally, this is the last and quick point about the legacy of the left. Ultimately the left will have to send the message. I think that they are not in a position to send the message as late as this, and I mean in this election, that irrespective of caste, creed, or religion, they will fight for the poor. I mean, this is an alternative kind of populism that they could have brought in, which they couldn't in this election. Eventually, probably they will be able to stand by the poor, because in a polarized situation where allegations of appeasement, allegation of siding with certain communities or others, they are making rounds. standing for the poor, irrespective of these kind of divisions, this kind of identities, would be a unique selling point for the left if they can carry this message forward in the coming days.
Thank you, Dwaipayan. I mean, yes, what you say is true. It would be true if we were talking about the left front as a party that stood for the rights of the disadvantaged, of the poor, etc. But one of the things that we've learned, and you and I have studied this very carefully at the ground level, not from offices and universities, but by doing fieldwork in rural Bengal, is that really what we saw in what you call party society or dominance without hegemony was in fact that initial momentum of fighting through land distribution, etc., was such an early part of communist politics in Bengal. And the last 25 years of that, pretty much, or certainly the last 20 years, was about how to maintain that dominance at any cost, whether it made compromises with religion, whether it the indiscriminate use of violence, which is why the word Shantrash used to be used to describe the left front tenure in Bengal. I remember when I first started doing fieldwork in 1999, this was the height of the left front. People would not talk about politics in the village where I have, since lived for since that time and where I do research. People, for the first 5 years, nobody would talk about politics. That was the level of fear of the local comrade. And this is what dominance without hegemony looked like on the ground, right? So that we've come in this 21st century, over these last 20 years, to a period where you can have these conversations on the ground, or are people having the conversations on the ground, would be very interesting, because certainly this century began in a phase where people were terrified, absolutely terrified, which allows me to also reflect on one quick thing which you said about booth management. And you remember that we used to use widely across India the term scientific rigging for how the left front used to win elections and putting people in, and it was an anomaly and it was clever. People were almost slightly jealous of the fact that it was done in a way that on the face of it, things looked okay. Of course, we've moved a long way since there because the technology of elections has changed. But one thing which I have a bee in my bonnet about, because I think we all should, is that the secrecy of the ballot has disappeared in Indian elections. Right? So earlier, you had booth level cadres getting people out to vote. And they would be sitting there ticking off lists on their voters list of who's turned up to vote, etc. But at the end of the day, they did not have booth level data on which booth has voted for TMC, how many have voted for Left Front, how many have voted for BJP, as we will get in this election. And thereby, parties are able to use both carrot and stick to manage populations of about 1,000, which is tiny. So, and this lack of secrecy in Indian elections now is terrifying as far as I'm concerned, and seems to compromise something quite fundamental about the nature of electoral democracy anyway, which is why you need booth level activity to win an election in this particular way, because the gains are very material. It wasn't just about turnouts. So that's just a quick observation, because you said that, but we will come back to more of these thematic issues when we're taking up some of the questions. I'll turn to you, Snigdhendu, now to talk about campaign strategy and messaging, women voters. And if you could just touch on some of the key manifesto issues for the BJP. I mean, Amit Shah made a statement saying, if you're in power, not even a bird will be allowed to cross the border. CAA has been raised several times. How do you put these big ticket messages alongside the subalternization of the BJP support? Over to you.
Yeah. So I will come to that. Before that, I would like to comment on what Professor Bhattacharya said on two aspects. One is why the left couldn't play that popularism of Spring-Proof War and trying to revive itself. It is essentially because in Bengal, the left space has been taken over by TMC. If we look at the TMC's policies over the past 10 years, it has been consistently against SEZs. It has been against forcible acquisition of agricultural land. It has been against large-scale displacement. It has been against cutting down forests. Overall, the broad left spectrum has been taken over by TMC. This is one point, which is why this Bengal election is this time more between the right BJP and the center-left TMC, where the left has little chance of ideological of placing any kind of ideological attraction to people, which is better than what TMC is offering. This is one point. Second is about this booth management. I mean, of course, definitely, it is absolutely essential to have booth level organizations, and BJP doesn't yet have their booth level organization in all of Bengal, 78,000 booths. But in 2014, there were about 34,000 booths, most of them virtually defunct. But now they have it more than 60 to 65,000 or close to 70,000 booths. They have their organization now. Even then, they don't have that kind of presence in 10 to 12% of the polling booths. But there is one thing that we observe, that when there is a strong wind of anti-incumbency or pro-incumbency, whatever, then these matters like booth organization, they don't even work at times, because there were the booth level analysis of the Lok Sabha elections revealed that there had been booths where the BJP didn't have a polling agent, a booth agent, but they lead in that particular booth. The TMC, left, Congress, they all trailed behind BJP, which had no polling agent. People just went, pretended to be voting for maybe TMC, but voted for BJP. Otherwise, how can they win in a booth where they had no polling agent? So, and there were several such booths. So, if there is, if the anti-incumbency against Mamata Banerjee government, essentially the grassroots level implementation, the panchayat and municipality level, and against grassroots level leaders, the panchayat level leaders, the block level leaders, the district level leaders, if this anti-incumbency against the local TMC is so strong that it can negate, it can nullify the effect of an ineffective booth presence, then equations can change. So this is the other thing I wanted to say. And about the candidate list, this is interesting to note that the TMC candidate has fewer Muslim candidates and more Dalit candidates. So last year in 2016, TMC had fielded 53 Muslim candidates, which is 18% of the total. This time the Muslim representation is 12%, but Muslims make 27% of Bengal's vote share, population share. But the TMC, so it kind of gives sense that the TMC is taking Muslim votes for granted. Of course, there is a possibility of Muslim votes consolidating behind TMC, because among the senior Muslim socio-religious leaders in Bengal, there seems to be a consensus that we can fight it out with Mamata Banerjee after she returns. But if her government fails, we will be in deeper trouble. So these kinds of trends are there of Muslim consolidation, but is TMC taking their votes for granted? So that in 2016, they had fielded 53 and 35 Muslim candidates won and went to the assembly, only from the TMC's polls. there were also Muslim MLAs and from the left and the Congress. Together, there were 59 Muslim MLAs in the Bengal Assembly of the 294. They make 1/4 of the population in any case. But this time, TMC has fielded only 35. So it is one thing we can predict, that Muslim representation in the coming assembly will be fewer. And TMC has also fielded more Dalit candidates. There are 68 seats reserved for SCs and STs, 68 for SCs and 16 for STs. So total 84 seats reserved for SCs and STs. TMC has fielded 12 more seats, that is 96 SCs and STs taken together. So they are definitely trying to recover their lost votes in areas dominated by the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes population by bringing in more representation from those two communities, while it seems to be trusting on Muslims that they would back her nevertheless. This looks like the situation, socio-political situation at present. BJP is, its campaign propaganda has two prominent slogans. One slogan is Lokkho Sonar Bangla, we will restore golden Bengal. They talk about the Bengal's GDP and industrial share in the 1950s. And then say that these subsequent three regimes have ruined it, and so we will restore it. And when they talk of restoring Sonar Bangla, they don't talk about only economic, but also the Hindu nationalist culture of 19th century Bengal. So these are the two aspects. And the second slogan is Paschim Bongoke Paschim Bangladesh hawa theke atkabo. Paschim Bongoke Paschim Bangladesh hawa theke atkabo. We will prevent West Bengal from turning into West Bangladesh. So you can imagine how high-pitched the campaign is on communal lines. And of course, it is in this reaction that we can see these tactical changes on the behalf of TMC to take a chance with Muslim votes and try and increase scheduled caste votes. And the same situation, the CPIM decides to challenge Mamata Banerjee on Muslim votes by taking the Indian Secular Front into their alliance. So the development, corruption, anti-incumbent development, corruption, and failed delivery of some very laudable projects, these are going to be the major issues, because Mamata Banerjee has also created her own beneficiary base through the social welfare programs. There are so many social welfare programs, and they actually did commendable until the leakage started. So this grievances, this grudge against this leakage versus her beneficiary base, the good work she has done, the popularity that she has, and this wave of Hindutva and the counter wave of so-called Bengali regionalism, যারা বলছে যে আমার মাটি আমার মা উত্তরপ্রদেশ হবে না, my Bengal, my mother won't turn Uttar Pradesh. They are saying বাংলাকে বিহার হওয়া থেকে বাঁচাও. We won't allow Bengal to turn into Bihar. This predominantly anti-North Indian sentiment. So it's a Pandora's box of hate politics of different kinds has opened, and to my opinion, this election will have more social impact than maybe immediate political.
Thank you, Snigdhendu. Just before I turn over to Shoaib, do you have any thoughts on Chief Minister, who would emerge as Chief Minister if the BJP won? Snigdhendu?
Oh, as you're asking me. No, the BJP hasn't decided.
I know they
on
haven't
anything.
announced anyone, but would it be Mukul Roy?
I think that is a very low possibility. I don't see him. I mean, as of now, whatever indications we got from the party's moods, uh, he is very little likely to be there.
So we really don't know. Okay.
No.
All right.
Dilip Ghosh
Okay.
has a
So
chance.
Shoaib,
Dilip Ghosh
yeah.
may have a very good chance. People are talking about Shapan Das Gupta also. But no one knows. It will be decided by Modi and Shah once things happen favorably for us, for them. I mean,
Okay, Shoaib, over to you. We have about half an hour in total left in terms of time. If you keep your remarks to 5 or 7 minutes, then I can take some of the questions in a more concerted way. So over to you.
Sure, Mukulika. Well, I
Thanks.
also, just to get back to the last thing, I also don't know who the BJP chief minister is going to be, but I hope it's Mithun Chakraborty. So coming on to less exciting things is, so the issues that is animating the Trinamool campaign. Now there are around 4 major poles of the Trinamool campaign. Remember, as we discussed, the Trinamool is really not a very organized party. It's not a very ideological party, unlike both the left and the right. This wasn't really much of a problem, given that it came at a time when the left was sort of collapsing on its own. But when the BJP coming into the picture, the Trinamool has really faced a lot of problems. The Trinamool is really good at what it does, which is winning elections, which is local level organization. But on these, large issues of ideology, it's out of its depth. Just to give you an example, over the last 2 or 3 years, as Dwaipayan and Snigdhendu both pointed out, we have been constantly going back to 1947 and discussing the Bengal partition on 1947. These are these large issues where the Trinamool really faces issues. Now, the Trinamool has done 2 things to combat this. With respect to organization, it's obviously got on Mr. Prashant Kishore and his IPAC consulting group, who have sort of tried to pummel the Trinamool into shape with respect to organization. So, you've had schemes like Duare Sarkar, which is again government editorial steps. You had DBK Bolo, this grievance cell, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. But that has sort of firmed up the Trinamool with respect to organization. You have IPAC consultants going in and interfacing with local Trinamool candidates with respect to things like breakup numbers, past performance. The Trinamool usually depends on local strongmen and leaders who are very good at what they do, but they don't do this. So this is a sort of suits and boots sort of consulting campaign which Mr. Prashant Kishore has put in. The second thing the Trinamool has done to counteract the BJP ideologically is, as the BJP comes in with the Hindu nationalist pitch, almost out of sheer need, the Trinamool has had to reinvent itself as a Bengali nationalist party. Remember, the Trinamool, while it has always been physically located in West Bengal, had actually no Bengali nationalist ideology or core or anything of that sort. I think if Trinamool is a sort of clientelist-based party, if you give it power in Pondicherry, it will take power in Pondicherry. It's really not very focused on West Bengal. But now that the BJP has come in with such force with respect to Hindu nationalism, the Trinamool has sort of has picked up Bengali nationalism. The Trinamool slogan is Bangla Nijer Meke Chai, which means Bengal wants its own daughter. It's a bit clunky, in my opinion, but this is what they came up with. And they've really pushed hard. The BJP is called Bohiragoto, which means outsider. Outsider doesn't really capture the charge of that Bangla word. It's really a slightly insulting word. Even more stridently, the Trinamool uses the word Borgi for the BJP. Borgi, are sort of Maratha invaders in the 18th century who led a very destructive invasion of Bengal. So these are all these, charged up words that the Trinamool uses for the BJP. Now there's a good thing about it and there's a bad thing about it. The good thing about it is that the Trinamool has actually managed to capture to some extent the media narrative around this. Bengali nationalism and Hindu nationalism, these are large, sexy ideas. Important, sexy ideas. So people like us, maybe as journalists, are drawn to writing about them. People want to read about it. People want to discuss these things. So this has captured to some extent the media narrative. A month or so back, Mr. Amit Shah was actually forced to sort of declare on stage that there will be a Bengali chief minister. I really don't think that in any other state the BJP has had to do this. So the BJP has also has had to counteract this. Right now, when Mr. Modi came on Sunday for the brigade rally, again he attacked Mamata Banerjee on her nativist pitch. And remember, the BJP has a set of tools for when you bring up left or liberal ideological campaign issues. The BJP is very good at counteracting them. The BJP struggles slightly when it's battling another nativist ideology, because at the end of the day, it really can't dismiss Bengali nationalism the way it could say dismiss the communist ideologically, because at the end of the day, there is at least some overlap with what it also wants to pitch, because remember, it is also a nativist party. The bad, though, with respect to that is that, remember, the Trinamool is not a Bengali nationalist party. These sort of things just don't come up overnight. If the BJP is today Hindu nationalist party, it is on the back of literally 100 years of work. The Trinamool has certainly not put in that work. Just because there are Bengali doesn't mean there will be Bengali nationalism, as the two are really, that the one is necessary for one, but it doesn't mean that it's sufficient for the other. So that's a difficult thing. It's especially difficult to push in rural areas, because there is really if everyone's Bengali, then you really can't have an antagonistic nationalist positioning in a land where everyone's Bengali. So obviously then you'll have other identities coming into play, which are communal and caste. What the Trinamool again has pushed on, though, is the second thing that it's got up is its old horse of left-wing populism. It's put in Duare Sarkar, it's put in his grievance cell. I actually misspoke. Duare Sarkar had not actually got 1 crore respondents. Duare Sarkar has got, according to at least the state government sources, which is the best we have, more than 2.5 crore beneficiaries, which includes everyone in the family. So that's an incredibly large amount. But again, like I said in the first bit, sort of just repeating myself, but maybe it's important, there is a sort of decreasing amount of return that the Trinamool is getting from its populist schemes, with respect to both because identity is coming into play, and secondly, because of its own local corruption. So these are the two things. The third thing that the Trinamool is really depending upon is the Muslim vote. The Trinamool is actually quite blasé about this. Mr. Shogoto Wright's MP sort of almost has on a couple of times said it openly that since you have the Muslim vote, it's impossible for us to lose. It's impossible for the BJP to win. So the Muslims, in terms of population, are around 27% of Bengal, maybe a little higher on the voter list. The Trinamool isn't really doing much as part of Muslim outreach. As Snigdhendu pointed out, it's even maybe taking them for granted. The number of tickets that it's awarded to Muslims in this election is actually quite low, in spite of the fact that it actually wants more Muslim votes compared to the last election, where it really didn't have this plurality of Muslim votes that it's trying to get this time. So it's really banking on the fact that since the BJP is so strong and it's coming in so forcefully into West Bengal, the Muslims will vote out of a sense of fear and panic for the Trinamool, saying that no matter how bad it is, no matter the local corruption, at least it's not a Hindu nationalist party. The third identity and the fourth point, the two identity points we discussed in our Bengali nationalism and the Muslim vote. The third thing, which again the Trinamool is responding to, remember so many things that Trinamool is responding to the BJP, is on the Dalit and the Adivasi vote. So if you look at data, the BJP really has done incredibly well. It's really something that I think we'll be talking and writing and discussing for the next 10 years. The BJP is really turns this concept of Hindu nationalism in many ways on its head. Hindu nationalism is usually seen to be upper caste led, and it's true for almost every other state in India. But in West Bengal, it's a very interesting inversion, where very often because remember Bengali nationalism, the identity point that the Trinamool depends on, like very like large numbers of linguistic nationalism depends on these cultural elites, which are often Bhadraloks of Calcutta and the larger, peri-urban, peri-Calcutta area. But on the other hand, Hindu nationalism in West Bengal is driven to a large extent by Dalit and Adivasi votes who are driven by identity, but also maybe are driven by a fact of economic competition with local Muslim communities, and they're sort of reaching out for this larger superstructure to help them fight a local battle. So these are the sort of four large things that the BJP is working on. So the Trinamool is working on. Sorry about that. The fifth thing, as Dwaipayan pointed out, is ground organization. Now, the Trinamool really actually has the best ground organization in West Bengal by some distance, just because it's in power. It has police protection. Police is going after everyone else. So they do have the best ground organization. But what we've really seen, as Snigdhendu pointed out, in terms of income, when a party is really strong, it can sometimes overcome a ground organization, and the BJP really is a master at overcoming ground organization using its two twin poles of social media control as well as mainstream media control. So this is something that I've interestingly seen across when I've traveled across districts in West Bengal, is that very often BJP supporters will go on to WhatsApp groups, which is something that's been written about, that's been discussed, and that we all know about. The other thing which I find equally interesting is because there's so much YouTube now, people generally watch Hindi channels, Hindi news channels from broadcasts from New Delhi, which do tend to be largely, towing the BJP line in many ways. So they do watch. So that has a strong organizational counter. That has a strong that counters the Trinamool's local organization. In fact, in many ways, the BJP has been better at counteracting the local ground organization because it often got media attention whenever its cadre was attacked as compared to the left. So these are these five sort of poles. With respect to one question that had come up with respect to women's voters. Now, traditionally the Trinamool it depends to a small extent on women's identity issues. So before there was Muslim identity, before there was SC/ST identity, before there was Hindu identity, there was a strong undercurrent of women's identity in West Bengal. If you look at the schemes that Ms. Mamata Banerjee has launched, there's Kanyashri, which is for girls who are 13 to 18, they'll get a stipend to study in school. It's a takeoff from a scheme in Bangladesh, which was launched in '94. There's Ruposhri, which is a one-time payout to a woman who gets married after 18. So both schemes, in a way, sort of help counteract child marriage. So this is something that Mamata Banerjee is dependent on. Mamata Banerjee actually till 2016 got more women votes than male votes. The issue is that I feel that in this election, this will be overridden by these larger forces of Hindu, Muslim, Bengali, and caste. So I think that this sort of thing will slightly pale in to the background, and it's very interesting because if you've ever been in a Mamata Banerjee rally, she has a connect with women voters that which I think is similar to what Jayalalitha had in Tamil Nadu. There was a sort of there was almost an identitarian connect that Mamata Banerjee had with women voters, but I think this time it might not play such a salient role.
Thank you very much. That's great. Those five big issues that are going to dominate the elections, and there in fact have been two questions around women voters, and that's very useful to note that even though it has this large female electorate, we know from the experience of Bihar, it makes a difference. Nitish Kumar was helped by it. Mamata was banking on it, but you're saying that these other issues may actually dislodge that as an important factor, and we'll have to wait and see once the results come, and we can break it down by look at the NES surveys and others to see how women have been voting. Now, I've clustered, we have just under 15 minutes. I want to start again with Dwaipayan, just to give you all a little break from speaking. I don't know whether, can you see the questions, the speakers? So, okay, so you will have been able to see, Dwaipayan, there are various, I think it's the same person who unfortunately does not name himself or herself, who's been rather critical of your take on the left front. I think it's a little bit cowardly not to put their names up, especially when you're being critical. You can be anonymous if you're paying compliments. But I think one way to reassure anyone who's watching that, and clearly these are people who haven't read your work, where you have shown, in fact, how corrosive party society, what the concept of party society has been for West Bengal society, West Bengal in general. One way, to address this might be if you can speak just for a couple of minutes on what left front's flirtation with religion and caste has always been. Just because it was a coalition of communist parties, we know right from the settlement of upper caste Hindus, James Bradbury's new work shows this, that when refugees came from Bangladesh, the city of Calcutta was chosen as a destination for upper caste Bhadralok members from Bangladesh. Scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, scheduled caste mostly were moved off to other districts, and that is what is coming to fore now in what is happening in this particular elections campaign. And of course, their sponsorship of Durga Puja and so on is, something that many people know about. So I would like you to just literally for a couple of minutes say something about the history of flirtation with religion in West Bengal, even in the left frontiers. That's one. I'll just give you each your questions and then we can let you have the last word. Snigdhendu, I think that there is a question about this, you spoke about this shift of the left front, erstwhile left front voters moving to the BJP. People are asking if this means that there is a greater legitimation of Hindutva ideology because there are more people. I think you've given the answer to that already, but you might want to clarify again from the ground. Do you think more women? No, you come back to it. You can make your points. Sorry, go ahead. What did you want to say?
No. It's all.
Okay, so
I was just
do you
answering,
think more women are going to vote than men? Do you think the female voter turnout is going to be higher? And finally, Shoaib, somebody's asked, is ISF the B team of Trinamool and can it help Trinamool? That's one question. Though I think ISF is in coalition with the left front, isn't it? It's not with Trinamool. But anyway, the second question is, there is no populist wave behind Mamata in the way that, say, Modi had in 2019. So how come she is so overconfident about winning in Nandigram? That's second question. And what is the anti-incumbency factors at work? But I think you've all talked about these already, but specifically on these questions, if you want to say anything, you're welcome to. So Dwaipayan, let's start with you. We have about 2 to 3 minutes for each of you. Thanks.
Mukulika, I'm just reading the questions. Can I just come a little later? Let me just read because I couldn't read the questions.
Okay, so I would advise you not to read the questions because the language is not always temperate. Let's say.
That I'm quite used to. I'm not bothered by that. No, thank you so much, but I'm not bothered by that. I'm just trying to get into the heart of the questions and see what is the point of it.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. So do you want to take the question about has Hindutva ideology been legitimized by the left front voters voting for BJP?
Yes, I just want to make one reference, that is the left vote hasn't shifted to BJP alone. From 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, left votes have also shifted to TMC. It is because of a section of left votes shift to TMC that they came to power in the first place. And then even if we look at today's TMC support base, we can surely assume that a section of them are erstwhile left supporters. It is from the later part of TMC regime that left supporters started switching to the BJP, or mostly after 2014, because you see, Bodlana Bodol Chai was TMC's slogan. That meant we want change, not revenge. In fact, initially for the first 2 years, there was no revenge in large scale. Mamata Banerjee had prevented it by banning victory rallies of his own party, of her own party. So it all started happening after the CPIM student leader Ritabbrata Bhattacharya, he and other leaders, SFI leaders, they heckled Amit Mitra, Bengal finance minister, in New Delhi in 2013, just ahead of the Panchayat election. And overnight, there was, attack on CPM all over Bengal. And that was the beginning. So from 2014, when BJP started sending in their leaders to protect their supporters, this left shift towards BJP started. And it actually intensified after the 2014 Panchayat election violence. So I'm not really sure how much this shift has been ideology driven. But I can definitely say that a section of the people who went to the BJP's camp essentially to counter TMC have now also started believing in the BJP's ideology.
Okay. So you're saying that initially it was a tactical, instrumental move, but over time it has become an ideological commitment.
Also, to
Also.
at least to a section.
Okay. Thank you. Shoaib?
Yeah, with respect to the ISF, it's actually quite interesting what the ISF really is represents. I'll come. So the gentleman or the ladies asked that if is the ISF the B team of the TMC. Actually, it's the other way around. If the ISF does well, there's a pretty good chance that the TMC would might be quite badly harmed, because the TMC is depending so critically on Muslim votes, and the ISF, who is Mr. Abbas Siddiqui. I'll come to him in a bit, because he more than he is an interesting character, and plus what he represents is also rather interesting. His base is in South Bengal, so the Trinamool has, for example, been weak in the Muslim majority areas of central Bengal, which is Malda and Murshidabad. It just sort of come in there in many ways. It just entered those areas, but its base is South Bengal. So if a large number of Muslims switch in, say, in North 24 Parganas, in South 24 Parganas, in Hooghly, which are in Nodia, the bases of Mr. Abbas Siddiqui, that will actually spell trouble for the Trinamool, not only in terms of votes, but it will show as to the level of local corruption that even that Muslim voters and Mr. Abbas has this young Muslim crowd. So in many ways, because he's a fiery speaker, he's a fairly conservative person. So that sort of fires up this sort of young Muslim crowd. So that whether that will play a role. So if anything, it'll harm the TMC. So the left has really taken. Although it obviously does not match with the ideology of Mr. Siddiqui, but it's taken a leap. So you must remember Furfura, for example. I was actually right. I was there in Furfura a couple of days back, where there's this huge Jolsha, which they call Isale Sawab, which is the equivalent of the Urus. And it's difficult really to emphasize the size of the crowds there. It was incredible, the number of people this was drawing in from South Bengal. It actually had people from as far off as Assam. It usually gets a lot of people from Bangladesh, but this year, due to COVID, it actually didn't have many people from Bangladesh. But there was still apparently 11 people who had made it on a cycle from Bangladesh. I don't know how they did it. So just to give you the strength of that the Furfura Sharif shrine that it has among South Bengal's rural Bengali Muslims. So if anything, if it does well, it would. I mean, it's a sort of spectrum. If it does a little well, then it might help the TMC because of the way first past the post works. It helps the number one party if there are two strong number two parties, right? That's just the way it works mathematically. But if it does very well, then it will be the TMC that will disproportionately benefit. Remember, it also gives the BJP a Muslim force, a Muslim face with which to posit its Hindu nationalist politics with respect to it. With respect to the second question, Mukulika, populism, as I've said it a couple of times, the Mamata has, the Trinamool has tried to push its version of left-wing populism. I really don't think it's going to play a very large part. In many ways, in spite of successes like Duare Sarkar, inexplicably, the Trinamool itself does not place a lot of emphasis in its own narratives, in its own campaigning on these things, preferring it to more maybe media-friendly narratives like Bengali nationalism, which maybe is in itself a type of populism, and we'll come to know how actually popular this populism is on the 2nd of May.
Thank you so much, Shoaib. Finally, Dwaipayan, you have literally a couple of minutes.
Yeah, no, I just read those. Those are not questions; those are comments by one anonymous attendee, and he or she is pretty angry with what I said. But of course, I mean, he or she doesn't have ideas about the criticality that I have vis-a-vis the ruling left during its regime. But it doesn't matter. What the heart of the question is that West Bengal had always been religious, and I mean, turn to the right is only logical. I mean, once he said it completes the life cycle. I mean, as though there is a life cycle for a state. The life will go on, and there will be many cycles, and so on. No, you see that commentators like this don't have the capacity to make a distinction between being religious and being communal. Of course, I mean, communalism can thrive on certain kind of religious sentiments, but communalism is vitally weaponization of religion, which is not religion per se. So it's not that the left was anti-religion when it was in power. And Durga Puja, of course, was one such thing which was considered as a festival. And this was not exclusively for the Hindus. And there were other festivals of other faiths which were celebrated in Bengal. And I mean, people from all different religious groups took part in them. And I think that there is a certain kind of commonality between the left and Trinamool, although Trinamool did it more actively than left, because the left had certain kind of ideological shield that it had to protect. There had always been a certain kind of governmental support for religious festivals as a kind of celebration of all different kind of people coming together and doing it in an atmosphere of harmony and peace. So this was, I think this is something which is common of both the left and Trinamool. And I think this had been the heritage, the richness of Bengali culture. And that is precisely why I'm not surprised to see that majority of those who voted for BJP did not subscribe to Hindutva ideology when they were asked by CSDS questionnaire. Because, but I'm a little scared about where it will all go in future, because we don't know, because after all, politics and society both are processes, though they are not, they are transforming all the time, they're not standstill. So, I mean, of course, Subhash Chakraborty and others who privately took part in religious festivals like Durga Puja, there was no bar. I mean, the left didn't prevent them from doing so. And I mean, for instance, Subhash Chakraborty had a special liaison with Loknath Baba, and of course, we know what happened after passed away. So this is something, I mean, this is beyond the debate. And James Bradbury's work actually shows that there is a certain kind of continuity between the left and Trinamool in different localities where Durga Puja was organized, although Trinamool as a party is much more involved. Left, CPIM as a party was not involved, but private members of the CPIM were, part of the organization committees of these puja festivals. So I continue to make that distinction between religiosity, which I think can bring a lot of positive vibe in society, and weaponization of religion that communalism does, which divides people. And so far, West Bengal could avoid the toxicity of this division, both through the left and Trinamool. I don't know what will happen in the future.
Thank you very much, Dwaipayan. I mean, that's a grim note to end on. And I think it is the question everybody is thinking about when they think about West Bengal and how important it has become for the BJP to win West Bengal by their own admission. Right? They've said this in so many words themselves. This has been fascinating. Each of you, of course, are such consummate experts of what you've been studying and thinking about for so long. It does seem to me, though, I think if we were to have a follow-up discussion, it may be, now that we've said this, what we have said today, we might want to get even more fine-grained. And, the headline could be, is the Bhadralok irrelevant for future West Bengal politics? If you look at the caste composition of, say, the Politburo, you get only upper caste. I mean, it's dominance of upper caste, even in communist leadership. I remember looking at that list and being very struck by that. If you, of course, Mamata herself, with an upper caste name, she behaves much more like a subaltern politician, has always done. I have written about it, others have written about it. That is her charm. But there is a caste identity there. And to go back to the very beginning, what we were seeing in those graphics of this different vote shares and seat share separations, and indeed the different phases of elections, where different parties poll their votes, is so distinctly a story of caste as well. And whether this nativism of Bengal and which is about language, about Bengali nationalism, regionalism, versus a sort of BJP Hindu national Hindutva is going to clash, might be a story that actually is refracted both at the one hand through caste and scheduled tribe and scheduled caste areas, making very significant differences in where the BJP wins its votes. But also there have been questions which we didn't get to, whether between 2019 and 2021, of course, the big difference in India has been the acceleration of the Hindutva project, and indeed the acceleration of protests against, say, the CAA or against the the 3 agricultural laws, and whether that is going to have any sort of knock-on effect. These are not necessarily Bhadralok-led issues at all, and yet they are about religious polarization, they are about class, they're about agriculture, and these issues have currency in Bengal. So it'll be interesting to see in the remaining part of this month before the first polling date whether these have an impact. So maybe we should regroup in a month's time and take stock. So thank you all, whoever's watching. Thank you very much for joining us for this wonderful Adda. I wish we were together in the same room, but this is not bad. This is a pretty good way to do it. So thank you to Rahul and the Center for Policy Research for inviting us all. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.